The office floor emptied faster than usual that evening, keyboards falling silent, chairs sliding back into place, and soft goodbyes fading into the hallway as people rushed home to their families and routines. But Ethan Miller stayed seated, a moment longer, staring at his screen without really seeing it, sensing that strange pause in the air that comes just before something important happens. And when he finally stood to grab his bag, he heard his name spoken calmly from behind, making him turn to see Laura Bennett standing near her glass office, her posture steady, but her eyes carrying a weight he had never seen before. And when she asked him to stay for a minute, there was no authority in her voice, only something careful and unsure, which immediately told him this was not about deadlines or reports. So he agreed and watched the rest of the floor go dark as the last elevator doors closed, leaving them alone in a space that suddenly felt too quiet. And as Laura shut her office door, the click echoed sharply, breaking the calm and making Ethan's heart beat faster for reasons he couldn't explain. 'Cause Laura was his boss, respected and admired across the company, known for her clear thinking and calm leadership. Yet tonight she didn't sit behind her desk or open her laptop. Instead, she walked to the window and looked out at the city lights below, letting silence stretch until it became uncomfortable, and Ethan waited without interrupting, sensing that whatever she needed to say had been building for a long time. And when she finally spoke, her voice was soft and thoughtful as she asked him if he had ever felt like he was running for years without knowing why. A question so personal it caught him off guard, making him realize instantly that this conversation was crossing into unfamiliar ground. And as he answered honestly, he felt the room shift because Laura turned to face him with an expression that was open, vulnerable, and nothing like the composed leader he saw every day. And she admitted that she had asked him to stay not because of work, but because she needed to say something she could no longer keep inside, explaining that for months she had carried words she didn't know how to release, afraid of what they might change. And as she spoke, Ethan noticed the small details, the tiredness in her eyes, the careful way she chose each sentence. And he realized that behind her confidence was someone carrying loneliness and pressure without complaint. And when she told him that he was one of the few people who treated her like a person rather than a title, the weight of her honesty settled heavily in his chest because he had never intended to stand out or mean more than he should. Yet hearing that he mattered to her in this way made him feel both seen and unsettled. And Laura continued, explaining that she wasn't asking for anything and wasn't expecting him to respond in any specific way, only that she needed him to know the truth so she could finally breathe again. And Ethan struggled to find words as his thoughts raced, knowing the situation was complicated by power, responsibility, and professional lines that should never blur, yet also knowing that feelings don't always follow rules. And as the city lights flickered outside the window, he realized this moment would stay with him long after tonight, because nothing about it felt careless or impulsive. It felt heavy, with restraint and respect. And when Laura finally sat down, folding her hands as if bracing herself for whatever he might say, Ethan chose honesty over safety and admitted that he respected her deeply but needed time to understand what all this meant. And she accepted his response with quiet understanding, thanking him for listening without judgment. And as they both stood to leave, the space between them felt charged with words left unsaid, and Ethan walked out of the office into the empty hallway knowing that the simple request to stay behind had opened a door he wasn't sure he was ready to walk through, but also knowing that whatever came next, his life would no longer feel quite the same. The days after that quiet evening moved faster than Ethan expected. And yet every hour felt heavier because nothing was openly said and everything was silently understood. And when he arrived at work each morning, he felt the difference immediately in the way Laura greeted him with the same calm professionalism, but with a gentler tone, as if she was carefully placing space between them without building walls. And this balance confused him more than the honesty of that night, because he could still sense the truth she had shared lingering in the air, shaping every small moment, and during meetings he caught himself watching her more closely, noticing how she carried herself with strength while hiding exhaustion, and how she listened more than she spoke, trusting her team but rarely leaning on anyone. And it slowly became clear to him that what she had revealed wasn't sudden or careless, but the result of long months of restraint. And one evening, as the office emptied again and rain tapped against the windows, Laura asked him to join her, briefly in the conference room, keeping the door open and her tone neutral, which made Ethan realize she was being careful not to cross lines. And once they sat across from each other, she spoke with honesty rather than emotion, explaining that she had thought deeply about what she had said and wanted to make one thing clear, that she would never allow her feelings to affect his role or his future, and that she respected him too much to create discomfort or pressure. And Ethan listened closely, appreciating her clarity even as it stirred his own emotions, because her words confirmed that what she felt was real but controlled, shaped by respect rather than impulse. And as the conversation continued, Laura shared more of herself than she ever had before, speaking about the years she had spent climbing. The latter, the personal sacrifices she had made without complaint, and the quiet moments when success felt empty because there was no one to share it with. And Ethan understood then that her feelings were less about romance and more about connection, about finally being seen beyond expectations. And when he told her that he had also been carrying confusion and fear, unsure how to respond without damaging what they had built professionally, she didn't interrupt or defend herself. She simply listened. And that simple act created trust, because there was no push or pull, only honesty. And as they talked, the tension softened into something thoughtful and calm. And Ethan realized that whatever direction this took, it would be shaped by patience rather than rush. And when Laura asked him if he felt uncomfortable, he answered truthfully that he didn't, but that he needed time to understand his own feelings. And she accepted that without disappointment, saying that time was something she had learned to respect. And as the rain slowed outside and the office lights dimmed, Ethan left the building feeling clearer, but more aware, because he now understood that this wasn't a sudden moment of attraction, but the result of shared respect and unspoken support. And that knowledge made it harder to ignore, because it felt grounded and sincere rather than risky or careless. And as the days passed, their interactions remained steady and professional, but the connection grew quieter and deeper, built on brief conversations, shared understanding, and careful distance. And Ethan found himself thinking not about the complication of the situation, but about the calm honesty Laura had shown, realizing that the hardest part wasn't the feelings themselves, but deciding whether to face them or continue pretending they didn't exist, knowing that either choice would change something important. The weeks that followed moved with a strange mix of speed and tension, and Ethan felt it every morning the moment he stepped into the office. Because nothing was wrong yet, nothing was normal, and Laura continued to lead meetings with her usual confidence, making clear decisions and guiding the team forward. But there was now a quiet awareness between them that changed how every shared moment felt. And Ethan found himself more focused, working harder than ever, as if effort could silence his thoughts. Yet during late afternoons, when the office noise softened, his mind drifted back to her words and the honesty behind them. And one evening, as deadlines stacked up and most of the team left early due to an approaching holiday, Ethan stayed back to finish a report, only to realize Laura was still there as well, reviewing documents with tired eyes. And when she noticed him standing near the printer, she asked him to sit for a moment, keeping her tone light but thoughtful. And this time, the conversation didn't circle around the past but focused on the present, on the careful distance they had kept and the quiet strain it caused. And Laura admitted that pretending nothing existed was becoming harder than acknowledging it responsibly, because avoidance created its own kind of pressure. And Ethan agreed, all right, sharing that the uncertainty was affecting his focus and his sense of direction. Not because he felt trapped, but because unresolved truths tend to grow heavier over time. And as they spoke, it became clear that both of them were trying to protect something valuable: their integrity, their careers, and their self-respect, while also facing feelings that refused to fade. And Laura explained that she had spent many nights questioning herself, wondering if silence was kinder or if clarity was more honest. And Ethan listened carefully, realizing that her struggle mirrored his own. And when he finally admitted that he didn't regret staying that first night or hearing her truth, the room grew quiet in a way that felt calm rather than tense, because honesty had replaced confusion, and they talked openly about boundaries, agreeing that whatever happened next had to be chosen freely and responsibly, not hidden behind late hours or unspoken expectations. And this conversation marked a turning point, because instead of drifting, they were finally facing reality together. And as the days passed, Ethan noticed a shift within himself, a growing awareness that this situation demanded a decision rather than patience alone, and he began to see how deeply work and personal life were tied in this moment, because staying silent meant living in constant uncertainty, while speaking meant accepting consequences. And during a quiet lunch break, Ethan watched Laura from across the cafe near the office, noticing the way she smiled politely at colleagues but relaxed only when alone. And he understood then that she had spent years carrying responsibility without allowing herself vulnerability. And that realization deepened his respect rather than confusing it. And later that evening, when the office emptied once more and rain pressed softly against the windows, Ethan stood outside Laura's office for a long moment before knocking, knowing that this conversation could change everything. And when she looked up and saw him, their surprise crossed her face before settling into calm acceptance, and he asked her directly if she regretted telling him the truth. And when she answered without hesitation that she didn't, he asked himself the same question and realized his answer was the same. And they talked again, not with tension or uncertainty, but with clarity, acknowledging that feelings alone were not enough and that choices mattered more. And Laura admitted she didn't want either of them living in doubt or quiet longing. And Ethan agreed, realizing that pretending to ignore what mattered most was slowly wearing him down. And when he finally left the office that night, the rain had stopped and the city streets reflected the lights above. And Ethan walked home knowing that he was standing at the edge of a decision that could no longer be delayed, because some moments ask for courage not through action alone, but through choosing honesty over comfort. And he knew that whatever he decided next would shape not just his future at work, but the way he saw himself moving forward. Ethan's decision didn't come lightly. And by the time he handed Laura the folder with his resignation letter, the air between them felt charged with unspoken tension. Because it was not just a piece of paper, was a symbol of courage, honesty, and the choice to face life without hiding behind safety or routine. And when Laura saw the folder, her initial surprise gave way to something deeper, a mixture of concern, respect, and relief that he had chosen clarity over hesitation. And she didn't try to stop him, because she understood that love and honesty often require space, and that holding someone close against their will diminishes what is real. And Ethan explained softly that he needed to leave not to escape her, but to honor himself and their relationship, to allow what had grown between them to exist without compromise or confusion. And as she listened, her eyes glistened slightly, not with sadness alone, but with admiration for his bravery. And she admitted that she had feared losing him emotionally. But she also knew that forcing connection within the walls of the office would have been wrong. And in that moment, they shared a quiet understanding, the kind that doesn't need words. Cause respect had created a bond stronger than any impulse of attraction. And weeks later, they met again outside the office, in a small cafe tucked between familiar streets, a place that felt ordinary yet intimate, free from hierarchy, deadlines, and expectations. And as they sat across from each other, the awkwardness of titles vanished, replaced by the warmth of genuine curiosity and care. and Ethan noticed the same thoughtful eyes he had admired for months. Softer now, reflecting trust and relief, and Laura smiled in a way that felt unburdened for the first time, because she could finally be herself without masks or professional constraints. Yach. And they talked about everything and nothing, laughing at minor mishaps, sharing small dreams, and learning how to navigate life as equals. And as the conversation flowed, Ethan realized that what had shocked him that first evening was not just her confession, but the courage it took to be honest, and he understood that real connection often comes after the risk of vulnerability. Because trust built in honesty carries weight and meaning. And as they left the cafe together, stepping onto the quiet streets lit by soft lamplight, neither rushed or forced anything, yet every gesture carried intention. And Ethan felt a sense of peace he hadn't known while confined within office walls. Because the choice to step away had given them both clarity and freedom, and that clarity allowed feelings to be acknowledged without pressure, forming a foundation for something patient, deliberate, and real. And over the following weeks, it continued to meet. Each encounter, gentle but significant, filled with shared smiles, careful conversation, and the subtle intimacy of two people, learning to see each other without expectations. And Ethan noticed how Laura's laughter lingered in his mind, how her thoughtful pauses invited reflection, and how every small act of kindness carried layers of meaning that had previously gone unnoticed. And he began to understand that love and respect do not always arrive dramatically, but in quiet choices, shared honesty, and the courage to confront emotions without fear. And one evening, as they walked along a tree-lined street after dinner, Ethan reflected on the journey that had brought them here, remembering the night she asked him to stay, the silent office, the truth she had trusted him with, and how that moment had been a turning point in both their lives. And he realized that the real shock had not been the confession, but the way it had forced them to see themselves clearly, to value integrity over convenience, and to choose connection over pretense. And as they paused beneath a soft streetlight, Laura reached for his hand, not demanding closeness but offering partnership. And Ethan took it naturally, feeling the warmth of trust and shared understanding. And in that small touch, he recognized that their story was no longer defined by hesitation or professional roles, but by the deliberate choices they had made, by the courage to step away, by the honesty that refused to be ignored. And he knew that the next chapters would not be written in haste, but with care, patience, and the quiet joy of two people who had learned that love sometimes begins after the world fades and the truth is finally spoken. And as they continued down the street together, the city around them bright and alive, Ethan felt certain that staying after everyone had left that night was the beginning not of complications, but of a story built on trust, courage, and the slow, steady unfolding of something meaningful that neither had expected, but both were ready to embrace. Because some of the most important moments in life happen when we choose honesty over fear, clarity over comfort, and the chance to begin again with someone who truly sees us.